Hello and welcome to this very first video in this series. In this video, we are going to be building a very simple Hello World application. It will have a label that will say Hello World, it will have a dial that will change the color of the label, and it will also have a line edit that will change the contents of the label. As for what we are going to be covering in this video, we are going to take a look at what a Q widget is. We are going to use the label, the dial, and the line edit widgets to build the UI. We are going to use the vertical and grid layouts to position these widgets in the window. And we are going to use the signal slot mechanism that Qt provides to connect the dial and the line edit to the label. Okay, now let's create the project. Let's go to File, it's a little bit off screen, but go to File, New Project, choose Qt Widgets application, give it a name. I will call mine Hello World. Hit continue. To use Qmake for the build system. For the base class, let's change it to be QWidget. Since we're building a very simple UI, we wouldn't really need to use QMain window and QDialog, but we'll cover those in a later video. And one last thing, let's uncheck the generate form. This will create a form file that is essentially used by the Q designer to visually create the UI. So you can drag and drop labels, buttons. Again, we're going to use this in a later video, but for now, I just really want to focus on the code. Click continue, leave the language to none, select the kit that you installed when you downloaded Qt, and let's leave the version control to none as well, since it's a very small project. Again, we don't need to have version control with it. Let's click done. Just a bit of information about this hello world profile. This is essentially the project file that Qmake requires to generate the makefile. So here you can put information such as the modules that you're using for Qt. You can choose the C++ standard that you're using. You can also define any all the CPP and header files that the application requires that needs to be put in the makefile to create the application. Okay, so the profile, we are hardly going to be using this file or modifying it. Just know that this file is required by Qmake to generate the makefile. The first step is I'm going to include all of the relevant header files that we're going to need. So I'm going to include the Q label, Q dial, and the Q line edit, as well as the two layouts, which were the QV box layout and the Q grid layout. And let's also create these members in the class in the private section. Let's create them. So Q label, hello label for the hello world message. Q label, if I can type here, Q label, hello dial label. We need a label for the line edit. So hello. You can name these whatever you want. I'm just naming them so I can basically get back to them relatively easy. This is a capital L. And we're also going to need the Q dial and the line edit. What's missing here? Q dial, unknown type, Q dial. Oh, right. Okay. I know most of you are screaming into your screens telling me to fix my mistake, but anyway, now the final thing is Q line edit, and that's hello line edit. This is a pointer. And also we need to define our layouts. So Q V box and our grid layout as well. Come on, IntelliSense grid layout. Right, so and also let's before I create these widgets, I'm going to create a function to help me. I don't want to create all of this in the constructor, so I'm just going to create a function. Let's call it create widgets, and this function will essentially instantiate these widgets and put them in the layouts. Let's go to widget.cpp and let's get started. So void widget create widgets, and let's begin. So the hello label, we'll just create a simple QLabel constructor. We'll pass in the text that we want to show. That will be hello world. We also need the hello dial label, and that will say turn dial to change, or turn to change color. Okay, turn to, it's already obvious talking about the dial, change color. And finally the hello line edit label, which will say we'll just bring up the project, so QWidgets. It will say text to replace, right? Come on. Text to. Now we've gotten our labels set up. Let's create. What's happening here? Right. Okay. Sorry about that. Let's create our dial. So we have the hello dial. Equals new Q dial. And we also need to line edit. And finally we need the layout. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to create the VBox layout. So the layout equals new Q box layout, and I'm going to add it to the widget. So the widget has a special function called set layout, which takes in a layout, and we pass in layout. Okay, now the real fun begins. Oops. Let's now add the label to the layout, since it's going to be added to the vertical box layout. So if you look at the application here, you can see that the hello world is the first kind of widget that's in the vertical box layout. So let's do that now. Now the layout has a function called add widget, and that takes in a QWidget pointer, which is what we have. The hello label is a widget. Let's add it. Let's also, so now what we want to do is, let me bring up the application again, is that you have these 4 widgets. These are placed in a QGrid layout. So what we have to do is we have to first add these widgets to the grid layout, and then add the layout to the vertical box layout. Okay, so let's do that now. We have the grid layout. Have I created it yet? Yes. No, I haven't. No, I'll create it over here. So grid layout. What did I call it? It's a grid layout. Why isn't it picking up? Let me try it again. Let me create it here. And we also need to put this after the layout has been created, otherwise we'll get an error. So grid layout equals QGrid layout. Oh, oh my god, I can't believe this. I know, you guys saw that. No, it's all fine. So let's add, adding the hello world label, grid layout. So now we need the grid layouts add widget function. So add widget. I'll just add, I'll add these widgets in, and I'll explain to you what's happening after I'm done. So this takes in a QWidget pointer. It takes in a row index and a column index. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to add the hello dial label, which is the first label, and we're going to put an index 0, row 0, column 0. Okay, and we are going to do the same, because it's kind of the same thing for the other 3 widgets. So grid layout, add widget, we need the dial, the hello dial, and that's adjacent to the hello dial label, so it's going to be on the same row, right, but the second column, okay? And now the grid layout add widget, the hello line edit label will go on this second row, so row number 1, and the first column, column 0, and finally the line edit, so add widget, hello line edit, it will go on row 1, column 1. Okay, and let's quickly set the let's add this layout to the grid layout to the main layout. So it will be layout, insert layout. This needs an index, so it's actually, I think it's called add layout. Right, add layout. It's going to point it to a layout. Let's pass it in the grid layout, and let's run our application. See what we get. Oh, all right. We forgot to add our create widgets. Now let's run it again and see what happens. Right, so this is what we want. It's getting there. It's certainly not the same as this one, but you see you've got your hello world at the top, you've got your grid working the way you want it, and it comes under the hello world label. So we are getting there. But now let me just explain real quick the grid layout. Okay, so I've drew up this simple grid and I've labeled the rows and columns. As you can see that each cell will correspond to a row column combination. So at R0, C0, you will place object, the first object, and the same row, column 1, you will place object 2, kind of similar to what we have over here, right? So if you look at this as a grid, you can see that this label will sit over here, right? So at row 0, column 0. And if you go back to the code, you will see that the hello label dial is placed at row 0, column 0. Okay, so this is essentially how we build the Qt grid layouts. We just give the corresponding row and column index, and the layout will take care of placing the object inside the UI. The way Qt handles communications between objects is through a mechanism called signals and slots. Now, an object will emit a signal whenever a change or an event happens, right? So in this case, the Q dial will emit a signal whenever its value is changed. So as I move this dial around, it will emit a signal to notify any listeners that my value has been changed and here's my current value. And a slot is basically the function that will be called when that signal is emitted, right? And it can take in the values that were sent with that signal. And the way we connect these signals and slots together are through the connect function, right? So basically what we want to achieve is whenever this dial is moved, we want a function to be called that will change the color of this label. And whenever this line edit text is changed, whenever we enter some text into this line edit, we want the function to be called that will modify this value of the label, right? So yeah, so let's start by implementing that now. The first thing that I want to connect is the line edit and the label. So let's start by doing that. We need the sender to be the line edit. The signal will be the line edit's text change signal. And you can see that it has a const qstring as a parameter, which is what is going to be sent along with the signal. The receiver is going to be this, and the slot is going to be a custom function that we are going to write called handle label text. Let's go back to our H file and let's define our first slot. To do that, we're going to make a new private section called private slots, and let's create the function called handle label text. It takes in a qstring text, and this is a const. Let's go back to our CPP file and implement it. And the label text. Now, two things we want to do. The first thing is, if the line edits text is not empty, we want to replace it with the hello world. And if it is empty, we want to reset the text of the label to be hello world. Okay, so the first check will be to check if the text is empty. So it has a handy function called isEmpty. This will return true if it is. So if it is, I want the label or the label's text to go back to saying hello world. Else, so the text is not empty, or the line edit is not empty, we will set the label's text to be whatever we get. So set text to text. Right, let's run our application and see what we get. So if I change the text here, you can see it reflects back to the label, and if I delete everything, it goes back to saying hello world. Now, that's done. Our second connection will be between the dial and the label, very similar to what we did with the line edit. So we called it hello dial. That's our sender. The signal will be the value changed. This is emitted whenever we rotate the dial around, or its value changes. The receiver is this class, and our function will be handle, or our slot will be handle label color. Let's go back to our H file and create the slot. Takes an int val, which is what's being sent over with the slot. Go back to our CPP file and let's implement the function handle label color. Let's not forget our value. And the way I'm going to be changing the color of the label is by setting a custom style sheet. And now style sheets, if for those of you who have used CSS before, it's very similar. You just pass in the style sheet to it. You'll have you can set the variables like the color, the background color, the radius, the padding, and so on. So it's very similar to CSS. Now we need a QString that will have our custom style. We want to modify the color to a new RGB value. Give it to 100. So the red is going to be 100, the green is going to be 100, and our blue is going to be our value, the value that we get from the dial, right? So plus val plus the ending of the string. Now we need to first convert the value to a string. The QString has a handy function called number, which takes in an int and it returns back a QString. Now that's all running. Let's set our label style sheet. Again, we call the style sheet. It's very nicely named. Takes in a QString. Just give it our new style sheet, and that is it for modifying the color. Let's run the application one more time. As we rotate the dial, you see that the color is changing. Great. Now our final step is to just modify this label, make it a little bit bigger and center it here in the center, or align it in the center, sorry. To do that, we are going to use two things. First, we are going to set the alignment of the label to be centered. So label has a set alignment function that takes in an alignment, and let's just call it, or it's called align center. Save it and let's run it. Now it's in the center. The second step will be to use a Q font to give it a new font and a size. To do that, we need to create, so let's first look at the function. So the label has a function called set font, and it takes in a Q font, right, which we're going to be creating now. There's my mouse. Okay, my mouse is here. Let's just create it here at the top. So it's Qfont font equals new Qfont. This has an overload that takes in the family, so the font family and a point size. So let's just say times new Roman, and let's give it a point size of 26. This is a pointer, and this needs to be dereferenced because it does not take in a pointer, it takes in a value. And let's run it. And there you have it. We've gotten our final application like the one that we had at the start. You can turn the dial around, the color changes, you can modify the text, and the text changes, and that is it. That's the final step for this video. I really hope that you benefited from this, and you can see now how easy it is to create UIs with the Qt framework. And yeah, this is really the first video. This is my first time I'm making a video, so if you have any feedback or recommendations, maybe change into the style of the video, the way I'm kind of separating it into different sections, or if you'd like to see just like a maybe a little bit shorter and quicker, yeah, just let me know in the comment section below. And thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks again.